Shoot him right in the pocket. There you go, that went through him.
Why does every scent product you own stop working the moment the temperature drops below freezing? Because cold air kills scent dispersal. The colder the air, the slower the volatile compounds evaporate off your wick, your drag rag, or your mock scrape. By the time November hits and the temperatures are in the 20s and 30s, the $14 bottle of doe estrus you hung on a felt strip is barely putting enough scent to reach 10 yards, roughly the distance across your living room. Meanwhile, you are sitting in a tree, waiting for a buck to smell something he physically cannot detect because the cold shut down the chemistry before the deer ever had a chance. I fought this problem for years. I tried double dosing the wicks. I tried switching to gel-based products that are supposed to resist cold. I tried heating the wick with hand warmers. Nothing worked well enough to justify the hassle until a buddy who hunts elk in eastern Montana, that open prairie break country east of Miles City, where the temperature in November regularly sits at 15 degrees before sunrise and the wind never stops, showed me something so simple I almost did not believe it. He pulled a $2 emergency blanket out of his pack, the silver mylar kind you can buy in any Walmart camping aisle or any gas station survival kit, and he wrapped it loosely around his scent wick setup like a small tent. He said it keeps the scent warm. That is it. That is the whole trick. The mylar reflects your scent source's heat back onto itself, raises the temperature around the wick by 10 to 20 degrees compared to the open air, and that temperature bump is enough to roughly double the evaporation rate of the scent compound, even when the ambient air is below freezing. I tested it. He was right. I want to back up and explain why cold is such a problem for scent products, because most hunters do not think about this, and it is the reason half the scent tricks you try in November produce nothing. Every liquid scent product works by evaporation. The volatile compounds in the bottle, the ones that deer actually smell, have to leave the liquid and become airborne. The rate at which they do that depends almost entirely on temperature. Warmer surface, faster evaporation, bigger scent plume. Cooler surface, slower evaporation, smaller plume. At 60 degrees, a standard doe estrus on a felt wick produces a detectable plume that reaches maybe 30 to 40 yards. Downwind, roughly the distance from home plate to second base. At 30 degrees, that same wick produces a plume that barely reaches 10 to 15 yards. The scent is still there. It is just not getting into the air fast enough or in high enough concentration for a deer to detect it at distance. You are paying $14 for a product that works at half capacity or less during the exact weeks when you need it most. That is the problem the mylar blanket solves. It does not add scent, it adds heat. And heat is the missing ingredient in every cold weather scent setup I have ever seen. If you have used mylar for anything in the woods, I want to hear about it. Stay until the end, because there is a specific way to shape the blanket into a directional funnel that aims the scent plume toward a travel corridor instead of letting it scatter in every direction, and it takes about 30 seconds to set up. Before I explain the setup, a quick note on regulations. A mylar blanket is not an attractant, a bait, or a food product. It is a piece of survival gear. I am not aware of any state that regulates reflective materials in the woods, but I am not a lawyer and regulations change. Check your state wildlife agency if you have any doubt. The physics of why this works is the same reason emergency blankets keep hypothermia patients alive. Mylar reflects roughly 90% of infrared radiation, which is heat energy, back toward the source. When you wrap a mylar blanket loosely around a scent wick, the wick itself is not producing heat, but the scent compound on the wick is absorbing ambient thermal energy from the air and from any solar radiation hitting the setup. That tiny amount of absorbed heat, which normally radiates away and is lost, gets reflected back by the mylar and reabsorbed by the wick. The net effect is that the temperature inside the mylar tent sits 10 to 20 degrees higher than outside on a cold day. I measured this with the same $25 infrared thermometer I use for the copper pipe tests. On a 28-degree morning in Eni, Minnesota, that boreal forest edge country south of International Falls, where the spruce and birch transition into hardwood and the cold comes early. The air temperature was 28. A felt wick hanging in open air read 29. The same wick inside a loosely draped mylar tent read 41. 13 degrees warmer. That difference moved the scent compound from barely evaporating to actively producing a detectable plume. I could smell it from 5 yards downwind outside the tent. Without the tent, I could only detect it when I put my nose within about a foot of the wick. I want to be upfront about the limitations of my temperature test. An infrared thermometer measures surface temperature, not air temperature inside the tent. The air temperature inside the Mylar tent was probably somewhere between a surface reading of the wick and the ambient 28 degrees. I do not have the equipment to measure air temperature accurately inside a small Mylar enclosure without disturbing the airflow. What I can tell you is the practical result. The wick inside the tent smelled noticeably stronger from further away than the wick in open air. The thermometer confirmed the wick surface was warmer. The nose confirmed the scent was reaching further. That is enough for me to keep using it, even if I cannot give you the exact air temperature differential inside the tent. I am a hunter, not a lab technician. Quick pause here. Everything I just walked through, and 100 more tricks like it, is sitting inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition. 280 pages of the stuff that actually puts deer on the ground. And right now, if you grab it, I am throwing in the 30-day opening day roadmap completely free. That is a 60-page day-by-day preseason plan that walks you from the first scout to opening morning, so you start this season ahead of every other hunter in the woods. Link in the description, QR code on screen. This is the season you stop guessing. The build is almost embarrassing to describe because there is nothing to build. You take a $2 emergency blanket, still folded, and unfold it once. You have a rectangle roughly 3 feet by 4 feet, about the size of a bath towel. Drape it over a low branch or a forked stick near your scent wick, creating a loose tent shape with the shiny side facing inward. The wick hangs inside the tent. Leave the bottom open so the scent vapors can escape and disperse into the air. The tent does not trap the scent. It warms the scent. The warmed molecules exit through the open bottom and rise on the microthermal the warm air creates, dispersing further and faster than they would from a cold wick in open air. Quick pause here. Everything I just walked through, and 100 more tricks like it, is sitting inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition. 280 pages of the stuff that actually puts deer on the ground. And right now, if you grab it, I am throwing in the 30-day opening day roadmap completely free. That is a 60-page day-by-day preseason plan that walks you from the first scout to opening morning, so you start this season ahead of every other hunter in the woods. Link in the description, QR code on screen. This is the season you stop guessing. The placement relative to your stand matters because you do not want a deer investigating a shiny silver blanket 10 yards from your tree. Place the Mylar tent 20 to 30 yards from your stand, roughly the distance from home plate to the pitcher's mound. Position downwind so the scent plume carries away from you, and across the travel corridor you are hunting. The Mylar itself is small enough at the 3 by 4 foot size that it blends into ground clutter if you crumple it slightly and tuck it against the base of a tree or bush. I worried about the reflective surface spooking deer, and I want to address that directly because it was my biggest concern going in. On 3 different setups across 2 properties, I had deer walk within 5 yards of the Mylar tent without reacting to it. Deer do not seem to register the reflective surface as a threat. My best guess is that a crumpled Mylar blanket on the ground looks like a piece of trash or a random shiny object, not a predator shape. A flat taut sheet of Mylar stretched between trees would probably spook them because the shape and movement would be unnatural. A crumpled ball tucked at the base of a stump does not trigger the same response. Keep it low, keep it messy, and the deer ignore it. One thing I learned the hard way is noise. A fresh Mylar blanket crinkles loud enough to hear from 50 yards. If you are setting it up in the dark before a morning sit, that crinkling will blow out every deer within earshot. The fix is to break the blanket in at home before you take it to the field. Crumple it up, unfold it, crumple it again, wad it into a ball, flatten it out. Do this 10 or 15 times. The creases soften and the material becomes quieter, not silent, but quiet enough that you can handle it in the field without sounding like you are opening a bag of chips. My scent blocker drencher jacket at $180 keeps my body scent down. A pre-crumpled Mylar blanket keeps the setup scent up. The $180 jacket and the $2 blanket are the best performing cold weather combination in my pack, and one of them costs 90 times more than the other. The scent product you choose matters more inside the Mylar tent than it does on an open wick, because the warming effect amplifies whatever compound you are using. I tested 3 products inside the tent on my Minnesota property, using a Moultrie mobile edge camera at $100 positioned 15 yards from each setup. Tink's number 69 Downwind rut at $14 produced the strongest response inside the tent, pulling 9 deer investigations over a 10-day window during pre-rut. The warmth seemed to amplify the estrus compounds because dozen bucks both investigated, which tells me the scent plume was reaching further than the cold wick version. The same product on a cold open wick, on the same corridor 100 yards away, pulled 4 investigations over the same 10 days. Code Blue Screen Heat Doe Estrus at $18 performed well too, 7 investigations in the tent, but that product already contains a chemical heat activator, so the Mylar added less of a boost because the product was already compensating for cold. The Mylar tent gives the biggest advantage to standard liquid scents that do not have built-in heat activation. Those are the cheapest products on the shelf and the ones that fail hardest in cold weather. Look, I am going to be straight with you. Everything I am walking through in this video is just a small piece of what is inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition, 280 pages, 101 field-tested tricks, and right now you also get the 30-day opening day roadmap free with it. A 60-page day-by-day plan that gets you ready before the season even starts. I do not know how long that bonus stays in the deal, but if you have been watching these videos and thinking this could be my season, that is the move. Link in the description below, QR code on screen. Make this the year. I should address the obvious question. If warming scent works this well, why does nobody sell a purpose-built scent warming product at the hunting store? A few companies have tried. There are battery-powered scent warmers on the market in the $40 to $60 range. They work, but they require batteries that die in cold weather faster than in warm weather, which is ironic because cold weather is exactly when you need them. They also add weight, bulk, and one more thing to charge the night before a hunt. A $2 Mylar blanket weighs less than a candy bar, fits in your back pocket, requires no batteries, and works every time because it runs on physics, not a lithium cell. I ran one more test that I want to share because it surprised me. I set up the Mylar tent over a mock scrape, not a wick, on my Minnesota property. The scrape was a standard 2-foot circle of cleared dirt, roughly the size of a truck tire, with a licking branch overhead. I draped the Mylar tent over the licking branch and let it hang down around the scrape like a small carport. The idea was to trap the scent from the Doe Estrus I poured on the dirt and keep the ground temperature warmer so the soil bacteria that break down the urine compounds stayed active longer. In cold weather, soil bacteria slow down the same way the liquid scent does, which means a mock scrape in 25-degree weather is barely producing the volatile compounds that attract bucks. The Mylar tent over the scrape kept the soil surface roughly 8 degrees warmer than the exposed scrape next to it. Over a 2-week comparison, the tented scrape had 7 buck visits, the exposed scrape had 3, same corridor, same scent product, same application volume. The tent kept the scrape chemistry active through conditions that would have shut the exposed scrape down. I did not expect the Mylar to work on a ground scrape as well as it worked on a hanging wick. The ground application actually showed a bigger proportional boost than the wick application, probably because the soil holds heat better than a felt strip and the Mylar kept that held heat from radiating away. I am not saying the electronic warmers are bad products. I am saying the $2 solution outperforms the $50 solution in the conditions that matter most, and that is a hard thing for a company to compete with. Look, I am going to be straight with you. Everything I am walking through in this video is just a small piece of what is inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition, 280 pages, 101 field-tested tricks, and right now you also get the 30-day opening day roadmap free with it. A 60-page day-by-day plan that gets you ready before the season even starts. I do not know how long that bonus stays in the deal, but if you have been watching these videos and thinking this could be my season, that is the move. Link in the description below, QR code on screen. Make this the year. A buddy who hunts the coastal plain of Delaware, that flat agricultural and swamp edge country between Dover and the bay where the wind blows steady off the water and the November mornings hover around 30 to 35 degrees, tried the Mylar tent on his property last season. He called me after the second week and said his camera numbers on the tent setup were roughly triple his cold wick numbers for the same corridor. He ran Tink's number 69 inside the tent and the same product on an open wick 80 yards away. 11 investigations on the tent side, 4 on the open side over 2 weeks, his numbers, not mine, 1 property, 1 season. But the direction matches what I saw in Minnesota and what the Montana buddy reports from his elk setup. 3 different people on 3 different terrain types, seeing the same proportional increase in activity around the warm scent versus the cold scent. I want to be clear that none of us ran lab quality tests, wind direction, humidity, deer density, and a dozen other variables differed between all 3 properties. But when 3 guys in 3 states using the same cheap trick see roughly the same direction of improvement, the odds that all 3 of us got lucky in the same way are low enough that I trust the method. Could we all be wrong? Sure. But I would rather spend $2 testing it myself than $50 on an electronic warmer that might not survive its first cold morning. I am not going to call that proof. I am going to call it consistent enough to keep using. Where this does not work is in warm weather. If the ambient temperature is above 50 degrees, the Mylar tent actually overheats the scent and causes it to evaporate too fast. You burn through your application in 2 to 3 hours instead of the normal 6 to 8. The tent is a cold weather tool. Below 40 degrees is where it shines. Below 25 is where it makes the biggest difference, because that is the temperature range where standard scent products are barely functional without help. In warm early season, skip the Mylar and use your scent products the normal way. The other limitation is rain. Water collects on the Mylar surface and drips onto the wick, diluting the scent. If rain is in the forecast, leave the blanket in your pack. My Elite Archery Int Core at $200 does not care what temperature it is. My Hawk Helium stand at $350 does not care either. But the $14 bottle of doe estrus I hang from a branch cares a lot, and the $2 blanket that keeps it working in the cold is the cheapest performance upgrade I have found in 27 years. My wife saw a crumpled emergency blanket in my hunting pack and asked if I was planning on getting lost. I told her it was for the deer, not for me. She said if the deer to survival blanket you might be hunting wrong. She is funnier than she thinks. The bonus is the directional funnel shape. Instead of draping the Mylar as a tent over the wick, fold the blanket in half lengthwise so it forms a long, narrow strip, roughly 18 inches wide and 6 feet long, about the length of a person lying down. Curl it into a half-pipe shape, like a rain gutter, with the shiny side facing in. Point the open end of the half-pipe toward the travel corridor you are hunting. Place the wick inside the half-pipe near the closed end. The shape concentrates the warmed scent vapors and directs them in one direction, instead of letting them scatter 360 degrees. It works like cupping your hands around your mouth when you yell. The sound, or in this case the scent, carries further in the aimed direction. On my Minnesota property, the funnel shape pulled deer from noticeably further downwind than the open tent shape. I cannot give you an exact distance because I do not have a way to measure scent plume reach. But the camera positioned 40 yards downwind of the funnel, roughly the distance across half a football field, captured 3 deer orienting toward the source from that distance. The camera at the same position behind the open tent only captured deer orienting from about 20 yards. If you have tested scent warming in cold weather, leave your setup below. A $2 Mylar blanket, a $14 bottle of doe estrus. A cold November morning. Fold, drape, and let the physics do the work. The scent companies will sell you a $50 electronic warmer that runs on batteries and dies at 3 a.m. The emergency blanket runs on infrared reflection and never runs out of charge. Try it on your next cold sit and see what happens. The total cost of a full cold weather scent operation using the Mylar method is roughly $16. A $2 blanket, a $14 bottle of Tinks number 69, and the felt wicks you already have. That covers roughly 15 to 20 cold weather sits. The commercial cold weather scent approach using heat-activated products and electronic warmers runs $60 to $80 for the same number of sits. Over a 5-year period, the Mylar method saves roughly $250 to $300, and the blanket itself lasts multiple seasons because Mylar does not degrade in weather the way fabric does. My Montana buddy has been using the same blanket for 3 seasons. It looks rough. It smells like every scent product he has ever used, and it still reflects heat the same as the day he bought it. The deer do not judge the equipment. They follow the scent, and in cold weather, the scent follows the heat. Give the blanket the heat, and it gives you the scent plume you have been losing every November since you started hunting. If nothing shows, you spent $2. If something shows, you just solved the one problem that makes late-season scent setups feel pointless.